For the second part of this class this week, I'm going to talk about muscles. And we're going to start out by talking about how muscles are classified. And there's essentially three classes of muscles. The first is the voluntary muscle. These are muscles that are under voluntary or conscious control by the person, and they can think about movement and the movement occurs. An example is shown here, the biceps muscle in the arm. These are generally called skeletal muscles, and the cells associated with these are called skeletal muscle cells. The second is involuntary. These are muscles that work with and are not under conscious control. You can neither stop them from moving nor can you make them move. Examples of these are the muscles in your esophagus that help propel the food down once you've swallowed it, the muscles in the rest of your GI tract that move things along, as are two examples. And then the third, and these are made up of smooth muscle cells. They are generally called smooth muscles, made up of smooth muscle cells. And the third is called skeletal. The skeletal muscle is primarily responsible to move bones, longer fibers that can contract quickly. And the biceps, in addition to being a voluntary muscle, is also a skeletal muscle. Now, as I said, the involuntary muscles are called smooth muscles. They are shorter muscle cells, and they are designed for more sustained, powerful contractions. They take longer to recover, but they're able to contract for long periods of time if necessary. The last muscle group is called a cardiac muscle, which is striated like the voluntary muscles, but obviously it's not voluntary. These are designed for repeat contractions without tiring. They're designed to contract without neural stimulation. In other words, they do not require any neural stimulation. Many of the smooth muscles, like in your GI tract, still require neural stimulation in order to function. What are some important muscles? Let's start with the head and face. The first muscle we'll talk about is the sternocleidomastoid. And this is named based on the three bones with which this muscle attaches. Sterno being the sternum, cleido being the clavicle, and mastoid being the mastoid process of the skull. And this is the muscle right here. Here's the attachment to the sternum. It goes up behind the ear and attaches to the mastoid back here. And there's another head that you can't see that attaches in the back. It attaches right here. The second muscle is called the temporalis muscle. This is the temporalis muscle right here. It's over the temporal bone and attaches to the mandible, as does the masseter muscle. The masseter muscle is right here. It's the speaking and chewing muscle. The masseter muscle is the most powerful voluntary muscle in the body, pound for pound. In other words, it's not the largest muscle by any means, but it is the most powerful. In the shoulders and ribs, there are several very important muscles. The first of these is the trapezius muscle. It's named because of its shape once you dissect it out. And this is the trapezius muscle right here. It attaches all along the spine, attaches to the posterior portion of the occiput, and then it attaches along the ridge of the scapula. And so it's basically like this. But when you take it out, it actually has four sides. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. And so that's how it gets the name trapezius. The intercostal muscles are not visible on this diagram. Intercostal means that they're in between or between the ribs. And they're useful as an adjunct to breathing. In the upper arms, which is up here and back here, we have the pectoralis major, which is this muscle right here and right here. It attaches to the humerus as well as to the sternum, and it is responsible for, I call it the push-up muscle. It's responsible for the movement that you do when you do a push-up. The deltoid is right here on the top, and again, this one is also named for its shape when it's dissected out. It attaches up here at the acromion process, which is part of the shoulder joint, and then also attaches to the humerus here, and it's responsible for raising your arm up over your head. And when you take it out, it has a delta-like shape. And then the latissimus dorsi, which is this muscle here on the side, it's a very large muscle that works in here. And I used to call this the Bruce Lee muscle, because in Bruce Lee movies, when he does his little thing where he makes this movement, he can make this muscle flare out. It makes him look really cool. The lower arms include the biceps, which I've mentioned before. This attaches to the shoulder at the olecranon process, and then it also attaches to the ulna, and it's responsible for flexing the elbow. And then also the triceps. The triceps is the same as the biceps, except it's in the back. And it's also part of the push-up movement, and it allows you to straighten your arm. It attaches to the olecranon process, which is a fancy name for the elbow. And then it also attaches up here at the shoulder. Now these two are named, seps means head. So this means that this muscle has two heads, 1, 2, and that this muscle has 3 heads. And you can't see all 3, but there are 3 heads in the back here. And then the hands. The muscles in the hand include this carpal tunnel. Now the muscle in the hands, there's the flexor radii and then the extensor radii. And these are responsible for extending and flexing the fingers. The carpal tunnel is right here. And the carpal tunnel is the ring of bones that make up the wrist. As you know, the wrist bones are called carpals. But there's a tunnel that is in the inside of this ring of bones. And your blood vessels and the median nerve and other nerves go through this tunnel. And carpal tunnel syndrome occurs when, for whatever reason, the tunnel becomes smaller and compresses the stuff that's inside the tunnel, including the nerve. And the symptoms are primarily related to nerve compression. Now, what are some important muscles of the trunk? Important muscles of the trunk include rectus abdominis. Rectus means straight, and abdominis means abdominal. And so here's the rectus abdominis. This is your six-pack. The rectus abdominis is the six-pack. Now here on the side you see some other muscles. These are called the external obliques. And these muscles are part of the muscle group that allows you to twist your trunk left or right. And then the erector spinae, which you cannot see, it's underneath the latissimus dorsi. It is responsible for allowing you to sit up straight from a bent over position. In the upper legs, there's the gluteus maximus. There is the lower legs. There are the quadriceps femoris. This is the quadriceps femoris. This is one of the heads of the quadriceps femoris. There's another head here. There's another head on this side, and then there's one on the lateral part here. Quadriceps means 4 heads. Femoris means leg, and so it's the 4 muscles. It's what people frequently call, in slang terms, the quads. In the back of the hamstrings, that's not the technical name for it, but I'll accept that for answers on the quiz or test. And then the sartorius. The sartorius is this muscle right here that wraps around, attaches to the lateral part of the hip bone, wraps around and attaches to the medial part of the femur, and it helps with moving your, twisting your leg either toward the inside, rotating your leg either toward the inside or the outside. Lower down, you have the gastrocnemius, which is this large muscle in the back of your leg, and then also you have this is the tibialis anterior, which is responsible for allowing you to pull your foot up towards your knee. The gastroc is the opposite motion. It allows you to stand on your tiptoe. Now, muscles are made up of fascia and connective tissue as well as the muscle fibers themselves. And a fascia, when you hear the word fascia, think of a tough translucent sheath that's on the outside of the muscle. This is also called the epimysium. And here's the muscle. This could be the quadriceps or the triceps. And on the outside of each head is going to be this sheath. And this sheath is called the fascia or the epimysium. Now as we work our way down, smaller and smaller, the muscle fibers, which one muscle fiber is shown right here, the muscle fiber itself is this individual muscle cell. And then inside that are the actual units that do the work. So the muscle fiber is wrapped in a sheath as well, and this is called the endomysium. Now, each group of muscle cells or fibers is wrapped together in what's called a fascicle. So you see that the total is wrapped up with the epimysium. Then you have these fascicles here, which are multiple muscle cells, and then each muscle cell itself is wrapped up. So each of these fascicles is wrapped up, and that the wrapping on that is called the perimysium, shown here. And so fascicles are groups of muscle cells that are wrapped together by the perimysium. Now inside each muscle cell are the fibers, as I mentioned, and each cell has myofibrils, not to be confused with myofibers. And these are the parts of the muscle cell that contain the contraction machinery. And this is just an example of what that contraction machinery looks like. This is an arrangement of protein fibers that are called sarcomeres. And these protein fibers slide over each other when the muscle contracts, and then they slide in the opposite direction when the muscle relaxes. Now, how does a muscle cell actually decide it's going to contract? Well, there's something called a motor neuron. The motor neuron is a nerve cell that's responsible for triggering muscle cells. And next week when we talk about the nervous system, I'll probably talk about this some more. But this is an example. This is the neuron itself. Now the neuron nucleus and cell body is up here. And then the cable runs down, the nerve fiber runs down, and then it has connections to muscle cells here, here, and here. And you'll notice that one neuron innervates many muscle cells. The neuromuscular junction are these sites here, which are the intersection between the nerve and the muscle, and there's actually a very small space between the nerve cell and the muscle cell at these points. And that space is filled with what's known as a neurotransmitter. This is a chemical that the nerve releases, and when it does that, it activates the muscle, and in some cases, the nerve itself. As I said, multiple muscle cells are innervated by a single motor neuron, and that multiple muscle cells being innervated by a single motor neuron is called a motor unit. And this is how the body controls the contraction, the strength, and the duration or the amount of contraction. Now each individual muscle cell follows the principle of all or nothing contraction, which means that each muscle cell, when it is activated, it contracts fully. So the way in which we contract something strongly versus weakly is by the number of muscle cells that are activated. So if you want to contract very strongly, then you have to then you activate a large number of muscle cells, multiple neurons involved. If on the other hand you want to contract something weakly, then you may only activate a few muscle cells and a few neurons. And this is how precision control is undertaken, is by controlling which neurons fire and which motor units are activated. So what about exercise? We'll finish by talking briefly about exercise. Muscles, when they are stressed, they react to stress by hypertrophy. Now I'll explain two terms here. There's hypertrophy and hyperplasia. And there are two different ways in which body tissues respond to stress. Muscle responds by hypertrophy, which means the muscle cells themselves get larger, and that means the muscles get larger. Hyperplasia, which does not occur in muscles, is if you increase the number of cells without changing the size of those cells. And so muscles react by hypertrophy as opposed to hyperplasia. If, on the other hand, the muscle is not used, or if the muscle loses its neural innervation, it can degenerate, and that degeneration is called muscle atrophy or atrophy. Muscles must be used, and they must be innervated in order to avoid atrophy, which is why if a nerve is cut or a person is in a wheelchair because of a spinal injury, if that nerve to certain muscles is not innervated, working anymore, those muscles will atrophy. Now, there are two types of fibers in muscle. There's the red fibers. Red fibers are red because they have a large amount of myoglobin. They also have a significant number of mitochondria. Red fibers are called slow twitch because they are slow, relatively slow, but they can sustain a twitch much longer and they're much more powerful. White fibers, on the other hand, have less myoglobin, which is why they're white, and they are called fast twitch, which means they can twitch quickly. However, they tire quickly. Muscle sense. Muscle sense is a total awareness of muscle position and tension that a person has. And this is why we can tell where our body is in space, where our arm is or our leg is in space, and how flexed that muscle is.